hit record. So with that, I'm Maddie Dahlheimer. I'm a landscape architect with Bolton & Mank, who is the consulting design team on the project. And with me here today to help facilitate, we also have Liz. I'll pass it over to you.
Hi, Liz McDonald. I'm a public information officer for St. Paul Parks and Recreation.
Hi, Liz.
And then we'll jump to Ruben.
Hey everybody, Ruben Collins, St. Paul Public Works Transportation Planning Manager is my role there. Great to be here.
Perfect. So with that, can everybody see my screen over here?
Yep.
Our breakout session slide. Perfect. So I know you guys are probably chomping at the bit to ask a couple of questions. I wanted to start very briefly with just a few kind of broader questions about the corridor. We'll take kind of a minute each. You'll see we've got two questions here that we wanted to get some input on, and I would encourage you to speak up, or you can type things in the chat if you're more comfortable with that. But just for the broader vision of experiences on, we're looking for some keywords.
Running on dirt.
Tammy, I agree. And, you know, Madeline, I think you might be experiencing them from the community. We're a little frustrated. So, you know, my husband and I bought on Summit about 4 or 5 years ago, and we love the boulevard and we love this area, and we can see some improvements, right? Like I could list off a couple to you, but I think us as the property owners and the people who live in this neighborhood and live on the area, we all feel a bit blindsided by this, which I know is not your fault, but there's definitely a lot of feelings when I talk to my neighbors about, you know, why are they doing anything other than paving the road? Because the biggest safety problem we have right now, and I bike about 10 miles a day on Summit. I run, I do half marathons, you know, all this other stuff. So we love the trees, we love the green space, we love it all how it currently is. We can talk about adding benches or more trees, but we're all feeling really, I don't know the best way to describe it, neighbors, but just a bit surprised and a bit attacked of why anything is being done at all.
Yeah, I think disappointed is the right word.
Yeah, that's a great way to describe it. Thank you.
You know, I mean, we're attending these meetings, and here's what we're doing. We're hearing the same things over and over. We're going to give you everything you want. But the reality is that no one can tell us how many intersections they're going to be on this elevated divided trail. So we're going out and figuring it out ourselves. And that's what we've done. And I can tell you that there's 199 when you count driveways and when you count streets. The entire length, including all of that, is about 25,000 feet. 7,000 of that is driveways and street crossings.
Well, bike lanes are crossing driveways right now. They're just crossing them in the middle of traffic. I mean, there's no.
I understand that, but here's the thing: you're talking about adding a second layer of curbing in a whole nother lane.
Yeah.
No, you're not asking a separate. You're moving the existing curbing. You're not adding a second layer of curbing.
Well, listen, Andrew, I bike, so I get where you're coming from, right? And like, there's some improvements I think we can all talk about. So I'm down at Pryor and Summit, 1926. So we can get rid of some of those turnarounds. Those U-turns, I use them all the time. They don't need to be there, and those are dangerous. I see people going down the wrong way of Summit using them all the time, right? But like, as a bicyclist, I don't feel unsafe on the road, except for when I'm down in St. Thomas and those kids are opening the doors. So I think all of us are just feeling a little like we bought these houses because we have a park in our front yard, and that's why we're paying $15,000 to $25,000 in property taxes. And now we're getting rid of our parking and we're going to do all these other things. And it just feels like we don't have enough taxpayer money in the city right now to pay to pave the roads. Why are we doing this?
So can I just jump in on that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think these are all absolutely great comments and great to hear. And I want to sort of reiterate two different items. So I know Mary had to go pretty quickly through a lot of that material because we wanted to share as much as we could. But I would like to emphasize that this current project or this current process that we're going through is the master planning process, right? So from our side of things, that's really the first step. And this is the most important part of that, right? So
Madeline, why are there no street intersections on these? There's no driveways, there's no walkways, there's no streets. It's like deceptive. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
like a
Lee has a
runway.
great point. Can we get that added to these slides?
Yeah, absolutely. So we, there should be some information on Engage St. Paul right now of some other materials that have been presented. But again, looking at this at the master planning level.
Yeah, but no, sorry for what Lee just said though. Can we have these slides modified to show the current street intersections
Yeah,
and the driveways for, he just asked.
totally different picture.
Yeah, this is extremely misleading and dishonest at best.
You
Right.
know, it's not, are we just gonna randomly spout BS at this thing, or are we gonna actually
Andrew,
have
do
a
you live on
structured
Summit?
conversation?
I think his silence says enough.
I'm gonna step in here too. I'm Dana Wood. I live on Summit Avenue, moved here approximately 4.5 years ago. And I guess what we are most concerned about is this huge master plan has insidiously infiltrated into almost a done deal. And no one that I know of that lives on Summit has even been privy to any of this information until just recently through public media. You know, I mean, we weren't even asked, is this something that you as residents who will be most affected by it, is this something that, you know, we should have an input in? And I feel that a lot of the representation of all of the diagrams are extremely generalized. I mean, we live across the street from a school. I mean, there's just so many different variables that I am all for bicycling, completely all for bicycling, and I'd love to minimize the number of vehicles. But this trail plan just seems like it was just so like under the rug pushed into our laps. And a lot of people feel it's the same part of the resurfacing project. They feel it's one in the same, and it isn't. And I think that it was deliberately piggybacked upon the resurfacing of the two sections of Summit. And so, you know, you're asking input from the your website. Oh gosh, what was it? Engage St. Paul, and it felt like confirmation bias. Like, you know, here we're giving you, you know, our ideas on what we think is the resurfacing and being better safety for Summit, and all of a sudden we're realizing, oh, wait a minute, this is for a regional trail that we didn't even know existed until just recently.
But there's so many better things we can do with this money. I mean, we talk about like guaranteed basic income, and you know, they just had the bike lanes redone last year or the year before. And I love the new bike lanes. I use them all the time.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, when it gets down to it, we have, it's an average of 85 feet between intersections, whether you count it as a driveway or a street. At 20 miles an hour, that's less than 3 seconds to decision. So every 3 seconds, a cyclist at 20 miles an hour has to go through and make that decision. And I'll be happy to let the moderators speak, but this is a community and we're going to engage. And if you live in this community, I hope you appreciate that.
Yep. The one thing I want to jump in and reiterate here is
I don't appreciate that one person or two people who are opposed to this thing are monopolizing the conversation. I don't appreciate
Agree.
that.
I bicycle.
I think we should raise your
Summit every
hands,
day,
and each
and I
person
have
should
for
be able
40
to speak.
years.
Okay, if I can jump in, I want to reiterate a few things, and then if there are some additional comments, if people want to use their hand raise icon, I can kind of go through and call on a few people. But the one thing I want to reiterate with the master planning process is this is the exploratory phase, right? So no decisions have been made about a regional trail facility on Summit Avenue, right? So, and I saw there was a note in the chat that Mary kind of went pretty quickly through some of the alternatives that we're exploring, and we can certainly click through some of those again within this group. But no decisions have been made, and that's what we're trying to explore here, right? Knowing that Summit Avenue is a very important corridor and there's a lot of different needs to balance. How can we kind of keep that eye to the future and that eye to creating safe facilities for all users of all ages and abilities, while certainly respecting the context of the corridor. So the general design process is we started a master plan, which is really exploring that high level view of how could we fit a trail in here and what's the feasibility of this facility. Those very detailed design decisions come later in the process, which is separate kind of from what we're looking at now, right?
You haven't
so I think
talked about any of
keep-
those considerations is the issue. You've just said, we want a trail, pick one. There hasn't been a single piece of empirical evidence that you've presented.
So our considerations that we're looking at are certainly the green space, the historic context, the need to balance the modes, as well as Mary touched on, the potential need to look at parking as a way to reduce the impact to some of those green spaces.
So what about,
with
the
that,
impact what about the impact of the residents though? That hasn't been addressed at all. And so far, there's a lot of people that live on Summit that have driveways on Summit that are going to be impacted, and that hasn't been brought up once.
Hey,
Madeline, if
how
I
many
could add to
people-
your list,
how many
is
people
the
have
historic
been-
perspective is really important, Madeline, if you could include that in kind of your list of things to keep the historic perspective of the neighborhood. It is a historic district, which includes the beauty of the streets, the homes and everything else. I've lived on Summit for 55 years, and my mother actually was quite responsible for getting it to be a historic district. And I'd like to add that to your list of priorities.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Earl. I want to give Cynthia a chance. She's had her hand raised for quite a while here. Cynthia?
Well, actually, I wanted to touch a little bit on what Earl just talked about. I agree with him very strongly. I have worked in St. Paul as an historical tour guide since 1998, and I have brought thousands of people from around the world down Summit Avenue. They are all just amazed at the beauty of it, the preservation of it, the Victorian feel of it. And I'm very, very concerned. I don't live even in St. Paul right now, but I was born and raised there, and I work a lot on Summit Avenue. And I'm very concerned about what will happen to the historic character if you start bringing in, different. And I understand, I'm not anti-bike. I understand that people need to bike. I understand that safety is a priority. I agree that the potholes are like a serious thing. But I'm wondering if we have even considered that there is something, another road to take other than Summit Avenue. Fix the problems with Summit, move the bikes somewhere else. Ide Mill Road is a great place. Grand Avenue is a great place. There's lots of other things to consider, and I'm very concerned about changing the historic. And I really feel for the bikes, and I really feel for the people who live on Summit Avenue. I've gotten to know a lot of the people that live in homes on Summit Avenue, and I think we can't just brush aside their concerns about they paid a lot of money for these houses, they pay a lot of taxes for these houses, and they want to keep their trees, they want to keep their park, they want to keep this beautiful, unique treasure that we have in St. Paul. For me, as a historical tour guide, it almost feels like we're trying to put a bike path through, some monument. If you're going to Mount Rushmore and put a bike path through it or something, I might be a little hyperbolic right now, but I kind of am very, very concerned about keeping the historic feel of Summit Avenue. And that's what I wanted to say.
Yeah, thank you, Cynthia. Thank you for that comment. I certainly appreciate that. And that historic context, I think, is one of those balancing priorities that we're looking at. How do you respect that context? And also look at, as infrastructure needs to be improved, as we know that, Summit has some issues with the pavement and issues with conditions that, how do we use some of those updating opportunities to kind of look towards that future?
And again, I would like to say, though, it feels like when a concern is brought up about some of these changes to Summit Avenue, the answer is always, well, we're going to do this on Summit, we're going to do that on Summit. And it feels like there hasn't been enough thought about, is there an alternative to Summit for some of this? Can we fix some of the problems on Summit, but maybe make the main bike trail someplace else?
But yeah, I totally agree with you. And Madeline, you keep mentioning safety. So I'm big about data. So like, how many pedestrians and bicyclists
Could you raise your hand? Is that possible? Right no, but I mean, I'm just saying, can we have some order to this? Because I'm hearing the same people just keep ranting and ranting.
Okay. So my question, which I think all of us are interested in, how many pedestrians and bicyclists have been hit on Summit in the past 18 months and ended up in the hospital?
I don't have that information.
Does the city have that information, and has that gone into any of this planning? Because I've heard safety being talked about a lot, and I'm big about safety. How many people have been hit and injured?
Two people have been hit and killed that I know of. there are many people who are hit. We used to have the city used to have a bike and pedestrian crash map that was up. The Department of Public Safety ran, which has been taken down, although they are updating it, which would tell you exactly.
I think that's great, Andrew. Like,
Yeah.
Madeline, let's get the city to update the map and look into any of the crashes that happened, why they happened, and how many people have been actually hit. Because I'm uncomfortable with the idea we're all talking about safety, but there's no facts other than anecdotal evidence about what the safety issue is.
Yep, Cynthia, absolutely. So I will certainly reiterate to Mary, the project manager, that it would be helpful to get some safety data posted to that Engage St. Paul website so people can see. What we have or what the city has available. I think the other thing to keep in mind is that we're also looking to industry best practices for transportation design, multimodal design, right? And those practices continue to evolve, and general studies, right? So not particular to Summit, but general studies on infrastructure are certainly things that we reference to look for. What are the current best practices?
I'm not interested in current best practices and what general studies say. I'm talking about, like, there's 5.4 miles. What is the safety issue on those 5.4 miles we're trying to solve? Because I sit here and I don't see an issue other than there's potholes. And the St. Thomas kids that double park and open their car doors and trying to bike.
Yeah, there isn't a statistically significant incidence of pedestrian accidents or cyclist accidents, is my perspective. I'm guessing that, and that's why it's not being presented.
Ruben, do you have that information? I feel like you might have access to that a little sooner than others might.
We do have access to MnDOT's crash database. That we get all of our crash data through MnDOT.
That's great, Ruben.
I don't know if, as Madeline said, we can make sure that data is posted.
So you haven't prepared it or considered it?
I would like to hear.
You have not prepared it or considered it?
I don't think that's a fair characterization. I think it is a modern best practice in the transportation industry not to wait until crashes occur and then respond to them, but to look proactively based on the feedback we received from users and based on best practices to proactively work to prevent crashes from occurring in the first place.
We'll all take that as a yes. Thank you.
Ruben, I'm that person in my bike with a chihuahua in the basket. And like, I'm just curious if if I felt unsafe, I wouldn't put my dog in the basket and bike up and down Summit. So ignoring anecdotal stuff, just how many people have been hit on the road?
Christina, we'll get that information posted to the website. I want to jump over to Laura, who's had her hand raised patiently.
Just in terms of anecdotal evidence, during this call, I've been tallying up the number of walkers and bikers, and right now there's twice as many walkers. I mean, it's a beautiful night, so it's a decent, I realize it's just one night. But in terms of safety, do we have evidence of how many pedestrians get hit by bikes? Because as far as I remember from my most recent reading of studies like this, those data tend not to get collected because they don't always get reported. And I feel like having a bike highway will probably increase the number of people who get hit by bikes.
Keep that at 85 feet in mind. Every 85 feet, that trail is intersected by a driveway or a street.
Okay, I'm just going to talk. So the reason this all came about was because the street is being reconstructed anyway. The stretch from Lexington Avenue to Victoria is over 100 years old. Its sewers are decaying. Everything's decaying. And so it was on the city's schedule to reconstruct this section of the street. And some people looked at who have biked in other cities. I've biked in Amsterdam, in New York City, in San Francisco, all over the place, and in the Twin Cities on some of the new off-street bikeways on Wheelock Parkway, on Mississippi River Boulevard, on Johnson Parkway. And
Andrew, those are incomparable.
No,
those are parks with no intersections.
You've been talking for a while. I just want to say a couple.
I'm just going to call you on your nonsense.
No, it's not nonsense. I'm calling you on your nonsense. Like,
Facts,
think about right now, the stretch west of Lexington Avenue. You have a 3-foot buffer and a 6-foot bike lane. And really this conversation on that stretch is, what if you moved that 9 feet outside of the parked cars and moved the curbs in and moved the parked cars into the roadway? And it's not widening the street. It's not altering the boulevard. It's not doing anything. It's not changing the historical characteristics of Summit Avenue. It's not like the bicycles, you're still having to go across driveways. This would have raised crosswalks at all of the crosswalks, what's called tabled crosswalks, which exist on Wheelock Parkway, which are really nice. The biggest benefit of this is that it could be maintained in the wintertime.
It can't be maintained. That's ridiculous to assert that a individually curbed, ballarded road is going to be maintained.
Well, I had a question for Andrew.
That's how Wheelock, if you've been riding around in the wintertime or Mississippi River Boulevard, they're all maintained during the wintertime. They're plowed by the Department of Parks.
Andrew, I don't have a fat bike, so I haven't done it in the winter yet. But so what you're talking about, though, is a bit different than what was presented. So you're not talking about getting rid of parking and changing the existing bike lane. You're just talking about raising it at the intersections. Is that?
No, I'm talking about moving. I'm talking about there has long been a desire to have a couple of east-west routes in the city of St. Paul and a couple of north-south routes in the city of St. Paul that are bikeable during the winter. That's one issue.
Yep.
And that the city can maintain during the winter. And Summit was a possibility for this. And since Summit was coming up for reconstruction, it was like, what could we do to make that happen? And the existing infrastructure with having the bike lane between the parking and the driving lanes means that parked cars pull in and out of those spaces and tamp down the snow and ice. And eventually you get ice sheets throughout the parking lane and the bikeway, and it's impassable during the winter. And that's especially true on the 100-foot section of the street. And parked cars.
I am half a block from Grand Performance. I'm sure you've biked past my house 100 times. I get what you're saying. And I experienced that too. And especially when you have people where they're supposed to move their cars when it's a snowplow lane and they don't, you get a bunch of ice. But I'm just a bit confused. So what you're talking about is not just adding raised sections at the intersections. You're talking about getting rid of parking. I'm just trying to figure out what's going on. Let's
look at a slide. Let's look at a side of the existing roadway for a second somewhere.
I'm gonna jump in here, and I've switched back to some of our presentation slides to maybe help provide some clarity on what's being discussed here. So as we know, our existing conditions, we have this bike lane in the street. So when we're looking at the regional trail facility and how we can fit that in while reducing impacts to the green space and the historic context, we can kind of toggle back and forth between these two, which I think are a good example of if we kind of swap the parking in the bike lanes, right? And we bring that bike lane up to the curb level, we can provide that physical separation for that facility, which will increase the range of users who feel comfortable on there. We're going to separate that out from the moving traffic, and we have our buffer between the bike lanes and the parked cars.
If you could move to the previous slide, though, the existing condition. I mean, all you're doing is moving the curb in. You're moving the curb in, and you're moving the parked cars in, and you're moving the bike lane out.
Okay, and I really appreciate you showing this, because this is clarifying a lot of questions for me of what I had. I mean, there's still issues of where, like, my husband, when he's biking, he's going 20, 30 miles an hour. I don't want anyone close to where a dog can walk out there. And I think someone else mentioned some safety issues of, like, this feels unsafe that people can get close to where the bicyclists are. And I sounded like with that person in New York City that died from the bike path. Like, bicyclists go fast, especially.
But there's a sidewalk. There's a separate sidewalk. That's not changing anything.
Yeah, totally agree. But this what I'm seeing on this slide is different than what a lot of people have been talking about. And it feels a lot more palatable than what I understood the situation to be. So
well,
can you
what's
go back
interesting
37?
Is they haven't even shown the 100-foot right of way. Show me what the 100-foot right of way looks like.
We can jump down.
Hold on, Madeline, if you can just slow down, because again, this is the first time I'm seeing this, and like I know other people in the line also might want to look at this. So what we have right now when you're between Lexington and Mississippi River Boulevard is parking, and then the bike lane that you guys just paved over, and then a buffer, and then the driver lane. What you want to do is flip-flop them.
So I will clarify, because our room is going to close. This is the presentation that Mary just presented.
Okay.
And all of this information will be posted to Engage St. Paul. So again, all of these are showing alternatives and not any specific decisions that have been made, right? So we'll be able to review this and provide some additional feedback, but that is certainly a very good point. And the reason we wanted to have this meeting was to get the information out so that people can see, because we are certainly aware that there's a lot of info going around that is not reflective of the process, reflective of some of the alternatives.
So I could see that. And then, like Lee just said, I don't think he's seen these slides from where he is at the 100-foot right of way.
Yep. So these will be posted to the website, and we're certainly the slides that Mary had gone through